Yeah, so I was an early adopter of blogging and went into it with the intention of making it my job.
This is Unlawful. Welcome to Unlawful. I'm Brandon Rankin as always, and with me today is Jordan Reid. It's funny because I've wanted to have Jordan on for a long time, despite the fact that she's not our typical guest, right? Jordan, you know this. You're not a lawyer.
Imagine not.
You're not a client. You're not a judge. But the reason why I was so excited to have you on specifically, I consider you somewhat of like a proto-influencer. And I'm sure that that has all kinds of connotations. But from the legal perspective, it has a very innovative and entrepreneurial connotation.
So as you say, I was one of like sort of the first wave of people who are monetizing their, it's funny, like kids these days, they don't, you say the word blog and they're like, oh, what? And I'm like, I knew you made you.
Well, no, and it's funny because I knew you were going to say blog, and I know that like 90% of the people who watch this are going to be like, what the hell's a blog?
Yeah, so I was an early adopter of blogging and went into it with the intention of making it my job. So I didn't just write a diary on the side. I quit my job as a manager. I was the HR person for a law firm. See, look,
there you go. It's all connected, yeah.
Connected. And I went into this thinking, I see an opportunity, this makes sense, I think this is monetizable. But then of course it went within months, like way beyond what I could have possibly imagined.
What was your idea?
Okay, so in 2009, I was extremely depressed. I was going to get my master's degree in like hospitality at NYU just because I didn't know what to do with my life.
Sure.
And I met someone who I recognized because she was frequently on Gawker.com, if anyone remembers that. And she was sort of known for being internet famous. And no one really knew what that even meant yet. It was like she was compared to Paris Hilton a lot, but for the internet. And she had a blog on Tumblr, and she said...
Is that Julia Allison?
Yeah, she's extremely connected, but she asked me to come on board her Tumblr, and I did, and I ended up leaving and creating Ramshackle Glam as sort of...
For people who were born in this century, what's Tumblr?
Tumblr, it's apparently experiencing a resurgence.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Because of all the chaos and the noise of social media, apparently teens are now flocking to the peaceful corridors of Tumblr where they can just like reblog art in peace. Nice. It's just like, it's a feed where you mostly just reblog other people's content.
Sure.
And post photos and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so Julia Allison invited you on her Tumblr.
Correct. And then I ended up leaving that Tumblr called Non-Society and starting my own site on a dedicated platform called Ramshackle Glam, which I would say within maybe 5 months of starting it, it became self-supporting for sure. And then I think within a year, I was shooting a show. A couple years later, I wrote the first of 11 books. And I've had a bunch of shows for like Allure. I had my own show with a very embarrassing title that I did not pick called Jordan in the House.
Nice.
Thank you. For a couple of seasons. It was a home decor show. I don't know. It's been a very weird trajectory.
Well, and that's the thing, right? People who their job at their companies is branding, right? They kind of have an infrastructure around them, and they sometimes hire third-party brand specialists, and they sometimes hire big ad agencies. You know, in New York, it's BBDO, Wideman Kennedy, whoever it may be. But you were thrust into this position, and that's why I think it's so interesting from a legal perspective is you went from 0 to 100, not only in terms of brand, but content and responsibility and marketability and probably income, right? Overnight. And that has to be at least a little bit overwhelming, even if it's what you were trying to accomplish.
I was so much bigger than what I was trying to accomplish. So to your point, all of a sudden having to sign, I don't know what you call them, behavioral clauses in my contract.
Sure.
And I was like, oh my God, like, okay, I have to like watch myself. Not that I'm walking around committing crimes, but you know. Because
NIL is such a big deal now, most people at least have a passing conception of what it is. A good example is my daughter does skateboarding, and her skateboarding instructor has pink hair and a chipped tooth. And one time my daughter asked her, hey, why don't you get your tooth fixed? And she said, I can't. Because she has an NIL deal and it's part of her image, and you know she would have to renegotiate.
Wow.
She would have to renegotiate her contract to do that.
Wow!
And like when she said that, I was surprised, but I understood it.
Well, you know, this was also, I think, coincided almost directly with when the FTC laid down the law about disclosure and how influencers have to put hashtag spawn, hashtag ad, whatever. Actually, the rules are a lot stricter than that, but nobody seems to follow them. I actually thought of that as a really big positive because I had already been running the site that way and talking about the business side of it just because I found that very interesting. And if I got a new client, I tended to talk about how I was excited to have a new client. So it didn't create disruption in the same way that I think it did for creators who were just incorporating branded products into their content without disclosure.
I can keep bringing it up, the fact of how bleeding edge or how cutting edge this was. But it's funny you mentioned Julia Allison. It had to be like within a year of you having your conversation with her that she's on the cover of Wired, right?
It was
like,
right before I met her, actually.
Yeah, this was really happening in real time. It's now you have 7-year-olds making $20 million a year on YouTube, opening up toys and whatnot.
Ryan. The management company that I was with, the first wave of people that this woman who created this agency called Digital Brand Architects, which was the very first influencer focused, like online content focused agency. And it was started by this woman named Karen Rabinovitz, who I knew from like the event circuit. It was early on, people would invite me and my 10 people that did the same thing to an event, and it was very nice, and like they got some publicity, but there was no monetization. That was not sustainable. It was more of a hobby at that point.
Right.
But she saw the potential, and I came on to DBA in like the very first wave of her taking on clients, and within months, 6-figure contracts were being signed. Like there was an opportunity and she just ran with it, and it was incredible. Of course, now there's tons. Every major agency has a
digital
side, of course. Yeah.
A blog was just something that people wrote on a daily or weekly basis, and it would be about a topic. Yours, Ramshackle Glam, was about you and your life as a woman and a mother and a wife for a period of time, or whatever it may be. But how did that start to get translated into, okay, this is not just a blog, it's also a business, it's also a selling opportunity, it's also a product?
I think it was strangely organic because of how quickly the industry, by which I mean just advertising, began to accept and allow themselves to be led by influencers for a time, which I don't know if that's still the way it is, but it'd be the board of some huge company and they're like, so what should we do? And I'm like, oh God, I don't know.
They'd be asking you. Yeah, that's funny.
Like, well, it's funny you should ask that. For Q2, what I'm thinking is that we do. But I had to learn in real time how to put together content calendars and pitch decks, and you don't have to do all of that.
I think that to a certain extent, the industry was very lucky that they had very enterprising young women who were also extremely intelligent, extremely creative.
They were incredible.
And
that whole group of women.
And willing to just make magic out of nothing.
Yes. Yeah, and like come up with an entire industry from nothing. I pulled back from vlogging around 2020 because I was writing about, as I always did, whatever was going on in my life, what I was doing, and like projects and whatever. And I started feeling like, who cares? Oh my God. Like nobody needs my tips and tricks on how to keep your up and clean. Everybody is an expert on all of that now. And it felt very narcissistic to a level that I couldn't stomach at that point.
Interesting.
And because everyone was so online and everyone was creating things, I just felt like I didn't feel like my voice really mattered at that point. And it took some time to get that back and get back into writing again.
You mentioned books. Was it the case that you left blogging behind and moved into writing your books, or were those coexistent, or how did that?
I would say since 2013, 14, putting plans into place for not an exit strategy, but like an overlap, and to add layers of just different avenues of creativity that if one goes away, I still have these, and so forth.